he posed the question, what can we do to get Hawaii back?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think we've made some progress on that front. If I know you don't hear about these things in the media, though, yeah.
Yes.
And so you have to go outside the media and kind of get hooked up with people who know, people who are associated with the movement.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact, one place is at the University of Hawaii, and what is being taught there, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There are people there who now know that they can no longer teach history the way it was taught for so long.
Yeah.
For too long. Because, as they say, the Pandora's box has been opened, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
The cat is out of the bag, and it's undeniable. Thanks to people like Noe Silva,
Mm-hmm.
Tom Kaufman, and so forth. It's undeniable already what Hawaii's status is.
Mm-hmm.
Now even the courts are having to take notice. Let me give you a specific example that I learned, and you can find out some more about this if you go to HawaiianKingdom.org
Mm-hmm.
and watch the video there of the presentation. In 1994, there was a case, I think it was called Lorenzo versus the state of Hawaii,
Mm-hmm.
in which young Mr. Lorenzo was being charged with not having, all the license and insurance and all of that, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he was outside the jurisdiction, that he's a Hawaiian subject. Well, he was convicted. He appealed, and the appellate court either upheld his conviction or they dismissed his, or they denied his motion to dismiss.
Yeah, I believe they upheld his conviction.
Yeah.
And
okay.
denied the
Now,
motion.
one of the judges who was on that appellate court at the time was Walter Heen.
Mm-hmm.
And, recently, Keanu Sai met with Walter Heen,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked him about that case. And you see, Walter Heen has been following the developments, yeah, in
Yes.
Hawaiian sovereignty. Of course, Walter himself is one of us, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's been following the developments. So he was asked by Keanu, if you knew what you know now, would you have still upheld that conviction? And his answer was no, I would have to dismiss it.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, Lorenzo could show the four necessary elements in order to show that the kingdom is still here. And that includes the government. And how he could show that the government is still here is because of the executive agreements made with Cleveland,
Mm-hmm.
which his successors are still bound by law to follow, even though they don't. Because of that, the other three factors have, two of them would remain the same, yeah? The territory of exclusive jurisdiction,
Mm-hmm.
the population.
Mm-hmm.
But now with this executive assignment and agreement, there is a mechanism in place to have a government, and therefore a mechanism also to engage in relations with other states.
Yeah.
So now the four necessary elements are in place.
Mm-hmm.
And this is now being used in the courts, both at the state and the federal levels, for our people who are asserting that they are outside of the jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another development
Mm-hmm.
that has occurred. Like I said, these things you have to go on the internet or know the people involved, or be connected with what's happening at the university. These things are happening sort of under the surface, and progress is being made. And of course, as you know, Poca, there's still a lot of education left to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going on. I think even you would agree, for as long as you have been involved in the effort, you have to note now that knowledge is much more widespread than it was even 15 years ago.
Well, that's true. University of Hawaii would not touch the matter when I was up there advocating, and even before that, even the Hawaiian sections were not familiar with it. Were not willing to really handle it, and they were seeing it as very curious, but that was about it. And I was back there in the the late 60s and early 70s. So that was the situation. I believe very definitely the situation has changed. On the issue of what you were talking about, I have spoken with Walter Heen subsequently, and in fact back in the 80s and maybe early 90s, I was invited by him to speak before his staff and to talk about Hawaiian sovereignty and the history and the rest. And Walter himself has told me a number of times that had he known back then what he knew today, or after our discussion, he would not have come to the same conclusion. But even then, first of all, he does not represent the judiciary. He is out of the judiciary. Secondly, I do not come to the same conclusions that Keanu comes to, or the approach you have just taken in the recognition of a nation state that exists today. You see, there's two major approaches to challenging the jurisdiction of the state courts or the federal courts. And that is not on the basis, one is on the basis of establishing that the nation of Hawaii, or the state of Hawaii in terms of international law, continues to exist. And to show that, you would need to show the four basis that you have just talked about. The first being the territory, that we have an exclusive and distinct territory. The second, that we do have a distinct population. The third, that we have a government that is in operation. And the fourth, that you have international recognition and continuing international recognition. But even that is not enough. What I believe is a real challenge when courts attempt to apply jurisdiction over us is more the question of jurisdiction, not the question of whether or not the state does or does not exist. On the question of whether or not the state does or does not exist, I don't think Keanu or anyone else will be able to show that there is, in fact, an existing government that is in operation, that is able to protect its people. You have one or another group that says we are the Hawaiian government, but the most that they are doing is putting out identification cards. They say they are protecting you in terms of challenging the courts for driving without a license, or for this and that. But effectively, it is not there. It's not true. They have not been effective in representing people and getting people discharged. No. One or another time, you may have a judge who may dismiss the case because the prosecutor has not proceeded appropriately whenever that defense was raised. But you don't have it consistently, and even that would not constitute the existence of a Hawaiian nation. Now, some people are going to come back and they're going to say, well, prove to me where our Hawaiian nation government was or stopped to exist. Well, the proof is very simple. Back in 1893, effectively, the government stopped existing because there were no more operations. We had no Department of Health. We had no more Department of Education. Our national security fell apart. All of these structures did not continue to exist. One can argue that the state or the state of Hawaii or the federal government is, and this is the word that is used in law, is stopped or is prohibited from raising the existence or the lack of existence of a nation state, of an operational government. They are prohibited from raising it where they are the very cause of bringing about the demise of the Hawaiian nation. So that's an estoppel argument that you can use. The judges are not refined enough to even reach that stage. So they are left in a state of not recognizing the existence of a continuing government here in Hawaii at the present time. Of course, I recognize that others are continually saying, but we are a government. But in actuality, they don't compare to what a government consists of in terms of international law, which is the foundation of that argument, the existence of a nation state. The other argument is the argument of jurisdiction. The argument of jurisdiction is not where the defendant needs to prove that they exist or they are this or that. Whenever one asserts jurisdiction, the party that asserts the jurisdiction has to say, we have jurisdiction on the following basis, and they have to hit one of three bases in order to get jurisdiction over a defendant. They have to either show territorial jurisdiction or personal jurisdiction or subject matter jurisdiction. If they cannot show any of these bases, then they cannot extend jurisdiction. So in attacking the issues in that way, that they have no legitimate jurisdiction over either Wendislaw Lorenzo or anyone else who becomes a defendant, then they should not assert jurisdiction. What is happening in the courts is that the courts are so lazy, and the courts don't want to be found as being that court that had made that determination that the state system does not have jurisdiction. And they see the ramifications of such a decision, that they continue to avoid the issue. And they just say, well, we're not even going to address it. We find that it's not a valid issue, and we extend jurisdiction. And then they go into the case, the elements of the case, and the rest. So you got to be very clear about, and I know Keanu is attempting to push the existence, the continuing existence of a nation state. But factually, I do not believe that any real fact finder is going to find that either Keanu's organization or Leon Siu's organization or who else. There's so many people who claiming that they are the head of state of this particular organization, and they have their family members. They may have other members who have joined in and say, yeah, I'm part of this quote nation. But in actuality, when you compare it with how nations are to be measured, the effectiveness of nations to defend their territory and defend their people, you don't have it there. And that's why they're being dragged into court, because you don't have a police department, you don't have a fire department, you don't have any protection and regulations over the people themselves. So, as to your initial point, that there are many advances that have been made absolutely correct from 1970, let's say 1976, 1977, when the issue was first raised, and there was a Napi Pulava case with regards to jurisdiction and challenging the jurisdiction of the courts. Up to the present time, the Hawaii society has made major advancements in that the general population now knows about the illegalities that have occurred. In when was that? 84, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, not 84, it was back in the 90s. Excuse me. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs took a survey among the people of Hawaii. What percentage supported Hawaiian sovereignty? Over 80-85% supported Hawaiian sovereignty. It's just that they weren't sure what it meant. But they supported it on the basis that, yes, what happened in the history was illegal. So that over that period of time of, let's say, 20 years, the education aspect of the issue certainly moved forward. But this untanglement of exactly what is Hawaiian sovereignty, is it merely the elevation of the indigenous people, or is it the completion of a recognition of a nation state and the formulation of or putting together the governmental aspect of that nation state? What is it that the people really support? And you don't know. Even the native Hawaiians are not sure what they support. Thus, the issue of the Native Hawaiian Convention to address specifically that. What do we mean and what do we propose to the Native Hawaiians in terms of what is this sovereign entity, this governing entity that you want? Is it a nation within a nation, such as the Akaka Bill, or is it an independent nation, such as what many others are proposing? And this is what we were on the verge of, and we still are on the verge of coming out with. And you've heard me tell a story that the state withdrew all funds, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs withdrew all funds, and now we are unable to act. So what they are doing, the state is doing now, along with the assistance of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, is to step in and push only a nation within a nation approach. Then that is with the Hawaiian Roe Commission, where John Waihee chairs at the present time. But that is only directed towards an internal style of Hawaiian sovereignty. Okay?
Well, we are not the only example, though, of a state who had its government overthrown.
That's true, and we are not the only example of these questions of whether or not the state itself continues to exist or does no longer exist, or are we in, as one writer had said, in a floating situation of uncertainty. And if you look at where was that, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, they were nations that were uncertain because they were very much like Hawaii and then taken over by the Soviet Union. And then what they did was they reformulated themselves, were able to get into the existing government system that was set up by the Russians, the Soviet Union, and then flooded that system, took over, and then declared their independence. At that point in time, they were recognized because they had an operational state. You know, they could run their public affairs, they could run the education system and the rest. Yeah. So there you had an entity. Hawaii yet does not have that entity. And one can say, well, it's because Americans are in here jamming things up. But that's good. That's only an excuse. That still doesn't make an entity. So what we need to do is overcome that and begin to formulate that entity and to put it together and have enough people to say, all right, from now on, I'm not paying any more taxes to the American government. I'm going to reassign my taxes to the Hawaiian government. This is the constitution that we have. You still don't have that stage yet. You haven't structured the government itself. And as I said again, this was the hope for the Hawaiian Native Hawaiian Convention.
even though the Hawaiian Kingdom was able to be heard at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and to be able to file complaints against the United States.
Yeah.
That is, you do not see that as
No.
tests of the continuity of the state?
No, not at all. And that process and that program is highly elevated more than what was actually said there. What was said was that we do not have jurisdiction, the International Tribunal, you know. They said we do not have jurisdiction over this question because we have no other party in that empty seat. Now, we take recognition of the historical elements that you have talked about, but we cannot even address the underlying arguments until that seat is occupied. The United States has been named as the defendant. The United States has not succumbed to the jurisdiction of this tribunal, and therefore we cannot address the cause. We can say whatever we want in what is called dicta or opinion about, yes, we recognize the illegalities, we recognize this, and that. But beyond that, there's nothing that can be said. There is no jurisdiction. Now, taking that, what has happened is we have had it interpreted, reinterpreted, evaluated, and promoted as a statement that is not a clear statement of what that tribunal actually said. And the best way to do it is to go back to the findings of the tribunal and why it was dismissed. It wasn't a case even handled. It was a dismissed case. Now, we can also argue about, well, why didn't those darn Americans answer to the cause or answer to the charge? That becomes just an excuse to try to raise another argument. Oh, it's because they were afraid, because this, because that. But it still is an excuse. There were no jurisdiction taken and no decision made other than to dismiss the case.
So the Permanent Court of Arbitration will hear from people who are not even duly representing a existing state.
Oh, they will take a petition, and then in that petition and in considering it, they will at that point make that determination. But in this case, they didn't even reach that point because they took no jurisdiction. So you cannot say, well, we filed and they heard us. They didn't even hear you. All they heard was that there is no jurisdiction. They did not make a judgment. They had some concerns. They expressed those concerns. But it was not an official finding of an international body. And that is sometimes misinterpreted or mispromoted, that they found that we do exist as an international entity. I know this is heavy stuff, but all your questions are very legitimate. Let me take a pause.
Kaulana pua o Hawaii, kupa ama hope o ka aina, iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, pala pala anunu me ka paka. Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, koku ana honoa o Pi'ilani, ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano, pa'aku me ke oni o ka kuhi hewa. la'a o ke kanaka. Aole mākou a e mina mina I ka pu'u kala o ke au puni Ua lava